Real quick for the Inca. The Inca were not the first group in South America. We talked about the city of Chan Chan, which is up here, which was started by the Chimu, which were one of the groups on the coast of South America and northern Peru today. Now let's just focus more on the Inca for today. So, the Incan word for their empire literally meant realm of the four corners, which shows that they felt they had conquered all of the Andean world. That is the world around the Andes Mountains. And they kind of did. They had a huge empire. Modern day would cover Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. Basically, it covered almost all of western South America along the Andes Mountains. Its geography covered rugged mountain slopes, the high valleys of Peru, the coastline of western South America, which is, as the video said, the driest desert in the world, where it literally does not rain in some parts. They even add some of the, going the other direction of the Andes, going east of the Andes Mountains, they had a lot of the humid subtropical rainforest of the Amazon basin was in their empire. So one of the most incredible things about the Incan Empire was the wide diversity of geography and climate that it covered, that these people had. At its height, there were 7 million people in this empire. That is a massive empire for these times. And there were 200 separate ethnic groups in this empire. The most dominant would be the Quechua. Quechua is still a language spoken by, if you go to Ecuador and Peru, about half the people speak it. About 50% of people speak Quechua. Anybody here speak Quechua at all? You know a few words? A few words? Okay, cool. Yeah, probably your parents know more. And your grandparents probably speak it, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty common. So yeah, so Quechua was the main dominant cultural group in the Inca Empire. The Inca was the name for the emperor or king. When the Spanish came, they called it the Inca Empire because they assumed all the people were Inca. And when the Spanish also came, and they eventually take over the Inca Empire, they thought everything made in this empire was just the Inca did it. But there were many other cultural and ethnic groups in this area. The Inca were the one on charge, or the Quechua were the ones on charge. All right, so the bureaucracy, or basically to organize this empire, was a huge task. The Incan army had over 200,000 people, and it was the best trained and organized military in the New World, North or South America. It was the largest army. It was the most organized army. If you were a male, you had to be in the military. You had to do military service if you were a male. The Inca started off just like the Aztecs, a small tribal group, and eventually were able to defeat the local people around them and expand their empire larger and larger. This is one of the most amazing facts about the Inca. The Inca built nearly 25,000 miles of highways, of roads. 25,000 miles of roads. Now that's impressive. Much of it was in the second largest mountain range in the world, the Andes. So literally building all these mountain roads. Many of them are still here today. You can still see the Andes roads. In fact, if you could ever do something like this, it's my dream, this is what I want to do for my midlife crisis, is there's something called the Inca Trail, where you can literally hike these Inca trails for tens, hundreds of miles, all the way up to Machu Picchu, which is like right here, which is an area of Machu Picchu. It was an Incan village way up in the mountains that the Spanish never found. So it was preserved in its original tact as the Incas lived there. And it's about 12,000 feet up in the air, in the mountain range. So when you go up there, you have all these mountains, everything. You see the Amazon rainforest in the background, and you have basically from the Inca times, an Incan basically village city still there, which is one of the top tourist places in the world to go to today. It is absolutely amazing. My wife and I absolutely loved it when we were there. So the Incans were stonemasons. They created cities with palaces, temples, and the way they built their stones, it is so similar to Great Zimbabwe, it's a little bit eerie. In Great Zimbabwe, when they built the huge stone city in Africa, there's no mortar or cement holding those bricks together. It's the same thing in South America. There are no stones. There's huge walls the Incas built, huge palaces which are still standing today. And Peru is in an earthquake zone. They get 7.0, 7.5 earthquakes in Peru, which are among the biggest in the world. When I was in Peru, there was a 7.9 earthquake when we were there. We were literally hundreds of miles away, and we could feel it. And we felt one of the aftershocks later. It scared the crap out of me. I'm from Minnesota, I'm like, the earth shouldn't move. So we felt one of the aftershocks there. And you have these, buildings that were built in the 1400s made of stones, no cement holding them together. They're still there. The Incan ones don't fall. So they are put together, no mortar, which means basically they carve the bricks so they fit together perfectly on every single stone. Again, this was similar to the work done in Great Zimbabwe, and also kind of similar to the work done by the Aztecs when they built their monuments as well. So they were the master stonemasons. As far as trade goes, long-distance trade and everything was pretty much under the control of the government. The government controlled everything. There was pretty much no private business in the Inca Empire. The government ran everything. There were no individual merchants. Basically, you worked for the empire. Today, we would actually call what they did a form of socialism. A socialism, there's no private business. Everything's under control. The government, the people run it together. And it's probably, the Incan Empire is probably the most successful socialist empire or socialist country that's ever existed. All right, so the Inca rulers were believed to be gods. Other connections here, this is kind of like Egypt. They were believed to be gods or the sons of gods. They were mummified. The Incan empires were mummified. Again, very similar to Egypt. They were mummified. I'll keep going here. All right, these god kings basically supervised or were at the top of the empire. So you had like them on the top, you had nobles underneath them, and then the common people. So you had the kind of like the emperor, nobles underneath, and the common people. The priests were underneath the emperor. They led privileged lives, the priests. They had a big influence on education and overseeing of the religious rituals. So in a way, it was kind of a theocracy too. It was kind of like a religious-run empire. They had huge temples, which had hundreds of priests in them. The peasants are the common people. Several farmers worked together and shared land, tools, animals, and crops. So if you had a plot of land, you would literally have people would be like living on all parts of it and would just share it all together on their part of land, and they would live together, grow their crops together as a group. Again, today we call that socialism. Socialism pretty much meaning that the people share their goods as a group. And socialism has been tried many times in recent history and almost always hasn't really worked that well. I would say the Incas probably did better than anybody. All right, continuing. Instead of tax, they worked on state lands. There were no taxes. But you worked on state land. And it was distributed, so if you're one of the elites or one of the priests, you got better land. And they had something called Quipu, which was used to keep track of labor and services owed. Quipu was the way to basically, they had no writing. So it's pretty incredible. Quipu, what it is I'll give you look at a picture here. Not that one. That one. So Quipu, what it is it's basically like a series of strings and knots. So there's no writing. But they invented something to take the place of writing. In ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, much of the writing's about the crops. How much do we need? What should we grow? What should we do? Well, the Inca had that too. But what they used was by a series of ropes and knots, and where the knots were on the rope, you could literally read numbers, how much was supposed to be grown. You could see if someone was attacking. And the Quipu were basically, they had a whole postal service. They pretty much invented the postal service, the Incas. They pretty much invented a postal service because if you wanted to get a message from one place to one part of the empire, they had a series of runners. So what they would do is they would basically take the Quipu, have the message, give it to one runner, he'd run to a post, hand it off to another runner, who would run to a post, go to another runner, who would go to a post. So that's how they would get things, and they could get within, they were so efficient at this, they can go 140 miles in a day between different runners. So, if everyone's covering 10 miles and you have 14 runners, you can get that done. So, yeah, these guys were probably in real good shape, to say the least. They're also doing this in the mountains. So, this was about, the Inca Empire. So, pretty incredible. So why did they use horses? There weren't no horses. There weren't these large animals. Everything the Inca Empire did, there's no large, what we call, beast of burden. What's a beast of burden? A cow, a horse, something that you can use to plow, something you can ride to make your life easier. If they would have had this with horses, they probably could have covered, in their organization, they probably could have covered 500 miles in a day. But they didn't have them because there weren't horses in the New World. Real quick, you know why there weren't horses, cows, and those animals in the New World? They're from Europe in that area. But what happened was, archaeologists believe there were large animals like that in the New World. But what happened was, when the first humans came over and crossed over Alaska, these really large animals had never been around humans. If an animal's never been around humans, what happens when you hunt it? Is it going to run away? No. What archaeologists believe happened was, normally when people evolved in evolution, the animals evolved with them and learned how to get away. But when humans crossed over into the Americas, these animals had no knowledge that they were supposed to run or be afraid from people, so they believed that the early Americans were such good hunters, and the animals didn't know they were supposed to run away from people, so what happened? They hunted them all out. So that's the belief. So it's actually they were good hunters, and they were so good at it, and the animals weren't used to people, that they were able to hunt all the animals, and they were gone. Yes?
How about in North America? Did the buffaloes come here?
The buffalo were actually an animal that stayed in North America, but it was never domesticated. It didn't come from Europe. Good question. Real good question. All right, let's keep going. So yeah, maybe they could have domesticated a buffalo. I don't know if it's possible, but I'll say this. Has a buffalo been domesticated yet? No, no one's really been able to domesticate a modern North American buffalo. All right, yeah, they still exist. No, they exist. Go to North Dakota, they're there. All right, we'll keep on going here. Shh. All right, so otherwise, parallel descent, which is one of your vocab words, parallel descent. That meant that your family name, how your family went, could go by your mother or father. So basically kind of like a last name that could be your mother's or father's. Your lineage and your ancestry would be traced through your mother or father, possibly both. It depends on the circumstance. Most societies, it's through the father is where your name comes from. Does that make sense? But in Incan society, it was parallel descent. It could go by either. It was also that way in southern Mexico. So some societies had parallel descent. Some societies, it's traced to the mother. They had parallel descent, which means your ancestry would come from both your mother and father, your name. Continuing. Again, the sun was a major god. Inti, I-N-T-I, was the major god. This was the god that was over all gods. So we would call them polytheistic because they had a lot of gods. But just like the Africans, who had a major god and gods underneath it, that's how they believed it. They believed one god controlled everything. But then they believed there were gods and spirits underneath that god. Again, very similar to the African traditional religions before Islam came in to many of those areas. Let's continue. Another main god of theirs is Viracocha. Viracocha, if I'm saying that right, I might be saying that wrong, I'll double check. Viracocha was seen as the creator of men and the universe. Just like the Aztecs, and it's weird how these things happen in history. They also believed that Viracocha was light.